What if the earth is lonely for us? What if instead of wanting to be saved, it wants to be loved? And loving it would actually save it.
For me, it's being able to take care of these animals and giving them what they need. Earthfire, bringing in animals and rehabilitating them. It keeps you aware, keeps you on your toes, because they are wild, but they are still loving. They do care for other beings. So it's a real special thing to be able to connect with these animals, learn off of them and have them learn from us as well.
What if all life is sacred? How do we live then?
The bears come here, but this right here is their food in the fall before hibernation. And it's also food for coyotes, fox, birds, many animals.
I always loved animals as long as I could remember, animals in nature. And I thought I loved really deeply until I was asked to help raise 7 wolf puppies. And then I realized I'd never loved anything really, really deeply before. They were so alive and so vibrant and so intelligent and so passionate. And my response to that was, I can't keep this for myself. I have to share this with other people. It's too incredible, too wonderful, too enriching. John and I started Earthfire 20 years ago. We started off with the wolves. Slowly it expanded to animals that are native to the area. We have grizzly bears, black bears, wolves, bison, foxes, badgers. Because we wanted to be a model of showing how you can live with wildlife on the land. There's something magical about it. I mean, I look directly out at the Grand Teton. So it's part of the Yellowstone to Yukon wildlife corridor. Wildlife corridors are essential for animals to be able to migrate and flow, for life to be able to flow. And this is actually the last best mountain wildlife corridor left in the world because it's not been chopped up. So life can flow all the way from here up to the Yukon. And we live on a tiny finger that comes down just west of Grand Teton National Park that's still part of that wildlife corridor, that's part of that magnificent flow of life. Our animals are captive, but they're ambassadors. They're ambassadors for their species because we live with them very intimately here. We have experiences that you can't get in a zoo and you can't get in the wild. And again, that I felt bound to share with people because we got to see depths of who the animals are that you can't in any other circumstance. They're not just species, not just bears. Each bear is incredibly different, unique, definitely their own personality, and they insist on you knowing it. It's true of all of them. Not only are they beautiful, and there's a bearness or a wolfness or a bisonness that belongs to the species. And then from there are the individuals. Just like they're humans, and then they're individual humans. It's exactly the same. Each individual human is potentially a brilliant, creative joy. We get distorted in various ways, but the potential there is incredible. And for the animals, it's the same thing. It's like we all seem to be expressions of one great creative intelligence. It's so hard for us to actually meet wild animals. We can look at them in a zoo. We can be fortunate enough to have a momentary glimpse or interaction in the wild. But how do we get to actually know them? For various reasons, it came to be that we had these species here in a situation where they're not wild, but neither are they domesticated. Quite a few of them can never be free, and therefore we get to know them in a way that you can't get to know animals in any other way. There are the wild ones out in the wild, magnificent, free. And then there are animals that are like a bridge. They're still wild, but they're comfortable with people. And actually, they even like people. So because they're safe here, and because they like people, and because we get to know them deeply, they serve as a bridge. If you make a connection with another living being, and it really doesn't matter what it is, it could be a human being, it could be a dog, it could be a wolf, it could be a tree. There's a current that flows of love and admiration and knowledge, and each is enriched. It's like a fertilization that happens. Then we begin to glow and the other being begins to glow. If you're seen, you begin to glow.
I went to a very small school and we got to come to Earthfire when I was probably 9 years old. Jean brought a lynx out. The lynx just walked around and minded its own business, and Jean was watching it, and you could tell that the lynx was connected to him too, and they knew where each other were. Other creatures on this earth are not there for me, and if I have the privilege of interacting with them and forming a bond and a relationship with them, then I'm very lucky to be doing so.
We don't understand how responsive animals are to us. They also want to connect. Just like we want to connect with them, it's not different. We have one bear, Teton Totem, who gets really pissed if people come and look at him as a bear. He'll have a tantrum. And if someone comes and tries to meet him, something happens that's just magical, and I don't know why it happens, and they never expected it, but person after person after person breaks into tears when they meet him. We had two bear brothers, Huckleberry Bear and Major Bear, who grew up together, really loved one another. They'd sleep arm in arm all winter long. And then Major Bear got ill and he passed away. And a couple of years later, we had a retreat here with students. One of the students really didn't know much about nature at all. For some reason, felt drawn to Huckleberry and sat in front of his enclosure, thinking about drawing him. Suddenly, she felt this great sense of sadness and said, "This is weird." And then she found tears rolling down her face, and she said, "This is really weird." And then she sort of heard in her head, "I miss my brother," and she said, "This is really, really weird. I don't have a brother." And that evening around the campfire, when people dare to say things that they don't ordinarily dare to say, she said, Did Huckleberry have a brother?" What does it mean that a bear conveyed his grief to a human who had no idea that such thing was even conceivable, possible? What does that mean about the nature of reality? What does that mean about the nature of the connection between life and life, or bears and humans, one species communicating to another? We just got a coyote, gentle and delicate and lovely and timid. We have them in enclosures so they're safe. And then we have gardens for them where they can go out and play with water and trees and grass. And we've not been able to get her to go out. There's an opening, but it's just too scary for her. Life is just scary. And why wouldn't they be traumatized? And why mightn't they even be traumatized after generations of persecution like we humans can be too? So anyway, this lovely little coyote, we haven't been able to get her to go out yet. She comes right to the threshold, and then no. Safety is first, really, for all of us when you think about it. We can't expand until we feel safe. If we can, we'll try to get an animal from something like a fur farm.
Are you ready?
We did manage to get a fox from a fur farm, a little black fox, and we called her Foxy Moxie. And one of the wonderful things she contributes is look at the vibrant animal. This animal wouldn't have lived, wouldn't have been able to have the joy that you see it having. And they're so sweet and loving.
This is my Moxie. This is my Foxy Moxie girl.
Foxes can be incredibly mischievous, but very loving. We quite frequently get orphans. We get a lot of squirrel orphans. This particular one still had its umbilical cord attached. It was blown out of a nest in a huge windstorm that we had. It came with this tiny little cold pink thing. So I've been nursing this little baby squirrel. It's about 4 or 5 weeks now. The younger they are, the more difficult it is. And then someone else brought us another squirrel. It was a little older and easier to take care of. And it's the most fascinating thing. You have this little thing that's all blind, and then suddenly his eyes start to open, and they open more. And that little squirrel girl, in a matter of a week, you could just watch the process of consciousness awakening. We had a porcupine called Show Me, whose mother was killed, and someone bottle fed her. She was too bonded to people. She was wonderful. I could carry her around. Kids could pet her. She made these adorable little noises, and we'd go on porcupine walks, which were not very fast, by the way. And we'd go for walks, and then she'd suddenly fall asleep. We got 2 bison from a game farm. They were being raised for meat, and their mothers hadn't wanted them. There was a lot of work to raise a bison. So we took them, Bluebell and Rosebud. Rosebud died. She had been Bluebell's major herd. And Bluebell had been very standoffish, not the least bit interested in humans, quite aggressive, matriarch tough. After a few months, we realized that wherever we were, there was Bluebell. When you look out of the yurt, she'd be right there at the bottom of the steps. You'd have to walk over her to get out. Particularly if there was a retreat here, she'd be a part of it. When we have people who do come on for retreats, and we're interested in healing, and they have healing hands, and Bluebell discovered this. And she became what we call the leaning tower of buffalo. She'd come running towards the group, stand at the fence, and lean and demand her Reiki. I've had scientists here, conservationists here, artists, and animal communicators, because I think it's important to try and understand as much as we can of the nature of life. Shamanic people have seen Bluebell as related to all buffalo that ever were. And we had a Native American person come to one of our retreats, and after feeling the place, said, "You have to have a white buffalo." She was a Lakota, a pipe carrier. So now we have Nima. They do ceremonies for her, and said she's growing into her wisdom. She's now about 7 or 8. The wisdom grows over time. So she's growing into herself. She's quite magnificent now. And I've found that with many of the animals here. They change over time like we do as humans. They're more connected to something larger. The animals aren't just there as magnificent or as companions. They're also a portal into the mystery. How do you take this reverence for life and do something practical with it that's going to make a difference in how we live on the earth and our environmental issues?
Now there's bears here, but I feel safe. And they feel safe. They're not hunted. There's deer here, there's moose. There's all kinds of wildlife here. And they enjoy the place. You could hear the birds singing with joy. They have a place. And people like us, my partner Susan and I, and others, we just really want to see this preserved. And see not just us humans happy, but all of us here living this happiness.
People think of spirituality as perhaps woo-woo or not necessary. Actually, it's extraordinarily practical. We don't have a good sense of what practical is. Practical is living on the earth so it's sustainable, and more than sustainable, so it thrives. We don't think in a large enough frame. We think almost always very human-focused, which is natural. We're wired that way. But it doesn't work, because nature doesn't work that way. Nature's a larger frame. If we just focus on humans, we don't have enough information to make good decisions. What the animals have taught me, living with them, are the things of companionship and how life can work if we tuned to it. And I don't think there are many places that have the opportunities we've had here to live with this variety of wild animals who are yet not wild, and on this magical land in a wildlife corridor, that ideally it can serve as a seed, as the inspiration for sanctuaries and other places to begin to develop their own organizations with that frame of reference, and that the intention behind it could spring up all over the world. That would be wonderful.